Y is recorded in front of a live studio audience.
But there's got to be a good upholsterer.
And do they reupholster
I think
or
so.
do they just original upholster?
They reupholster, but I think
So
that's
like so many stain questions.
stain questions. What do you put under the like under the upholstery to make it
Right.
fluffy?
Right.
Like horsehair. That was the other
Right.
thing. Where do you get this horsehair?
How do you clean it?
Are there bald horses? Do they like, is it like a
Right.
Christmas tree farm? You have 20 horses, you shave 10. Yeah, they're
Yes.
like everyone's in a constant state of growing.
Mm-hmm.
Do horses do locks of love? I don't know. This is my
That's a
question
good question.
for bald horses.
Well, and like think of all the violin bows.
This is true.
Like, that's a lot of hair.
Cellos, double bass,
Cellos, double bass.
violas.
Oh
I
my
mean,
Lord. Like a symphony, that'll take out like
yeah.
a whole mane
And how come we haven't?
and a tail.
How come there aren't symphonies / stables where they're just constantly shaving animals in the back to make a new bow?
Right. And why aren't they like having fundraisers
Like,
or both?
right. Well, because you always talk about the idea of like, this would be one of the few times when the euphemism bringing sand to the beach would be correct and a
Yes.
good thing.
Correct. Like anytime you play Aaron Copland, it should help support horses that make bows.
Oh my God. Yeah, please.
Right?
Play rodeo, or better known as the What's for Dinner, the beef song.
Right. Yes.
What is it? The variation on the Shaker Sympathic Gifts.
Yes.
Please.
Right?
Fanfare for the Common Man. Let's just, and as I know it's all horns, but let's
But
just
but still.
take a moment for the string section.
Right? I mean, maybe they need a break.
And what
I
about
think-
woodwinds? If you're,
I
you know,
And the
shaving
well, the
horses.
reeds, what's
This
the
is what I'm
reed
saying,
made out of? I
right.
mean, yes.
throw a pond in the back for the horses to drink out of.
Yeah.
You take the weeds, boom, there you go. Bob's your uncle. Or Bob's in percussion.
This
I
could be
mean,
a whole new immersive. And think of like the wine and cheese on the lawn for the
my God.
guests.
Yeah. Like as cool as the what is it called now? The David Geffen Hall in LA is,
Mm-hmm.
right? How much cooler would it be if there was like a whole field next to it where you could go pet a horse before you go to the
Yes.
symphony?
Yes. Very cool.
How was your night? It was great. We heard an amazing performance of Mahler, and I fed a horse an apple.
I mean, that would be so
That's-
cool.
The greatest Tuesday ever.
Yes.
Why
You
don't people call
go-
us for these things?
Wait. I rode a horse named Siegfried before listening to Ride of the Valkyrie.
Right. 2 cycles of the ring.
2 in 1
Mhm.
night. We are like mega ring cycle.
Yeah. And I met a horse named Brunhilde.
I didn't want her to be Brunhilde. I wanted to be
Okay.
Siegfried.
Tristan.
Isolde.
Yeah. Trying.
My mother's this whole conversation is great because my mother is getting very upset about all of the inaccuracies of our Wagner discussion.
When
Although we
having
really
Wagner-
weren't inaccurate.
When were we having a
but we
Wagner
were
discussion?
just now.
Oh, right now, this instant.
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Oh no, this is going at the front of one of these things.
Right.
This might knock out our naked guy at the Bass Pro Shop for Monday's
I
show.
mean, right.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
Nothing about horsehair violins. But seriously, like, I just, one hand washes the other.
And you don't have to like harm, right? The horses are not harmed in the making of
No.
the bow.
No,
It's
they're
not
just-
like we're not saying do the like, I don't know, horses at the
It's
What
not
are you, at
even
the
the
Elmer's
foie gras,
factory?
but it's not even foie gras where you're force feeding geese to like, the horses get to live on. They're just
Well,
bald for a
right.
few months.
well, they're not fully bald. They just like their mane
Just
and tail
stubble.
look kind of dorky. Well, it's not
Yeah.
they're not fully bald.
No.
They've got they just don't have their luxurious lawns.
Right.
Like
But
they're
there
not
would be like,
Fabio.
no, but there would be multiple horses, so nobody would feel embarrassed or awkward.
Exactly.
It's just like, oh,
And we would
Gladys,
do
you're
it in
still
the
growing it out.
summer, so they might be
Cool.
hot anyway.
Yeah. No, I completely, I don't know why they would have a horse named Gladys and a horse named Tristan, but this is where we are.
Why wouldn't they?
And this is true. Oh my God. I get it, land is expensive in downtown LA or any major city, but like,
Is there any land left in downtown LA?
no. But just think about,
Wait, there's got to be some sort of like Ronald Reagan Ranch that's still around, or Wayne
oh,
Newton.
definitely.
Maybe Wayne Newton can help us.
I just feel like classical music everywhere is taking a hit. Let's be honest.
It is.
It's not the sexy new thing. It's
No,
not the new girl on the block.
it is not.
What about this is the perfect way to help fund the symphony,
Yes,
get people interested,
yes.
and they get to pet a pony.
I mean, right? This is a really good idea.
We have to call all of our conductor friends and see what we can do.
Okay,
This is our mission.
okay.
While you're on vacation, just go.
To find a
Are
conductor
you a
friend.
conductor, perchance? Yeah.
I mean, I can do that.
I don't mean
bet
to
I-
be standing
I
in your
bet
sun, but
I could find a conductor.
you a
I bet there's
conductor?
a naked conductor somewhere on that beach.
what was the thing that made you think that this was a story that needed to be told? And in this way, it's such a unique approach to looking at January 6th through the eyes of, well, what could have happened afterwards?
Yeah. So, the short answer is I love comic books and I love democracy. And comic books seemed like one way of helping to preserve and strengthen our democracy for reasons that we can get into. But the longer answer, Luke, is, I like most of the country, I watched the January 6th insurrection with, horror. But a twinge of expectation because former President Trump had told us a lot of what was going to happen that day. But I think it played out more violently and terribly than most of us expected. And then for weeks and months after that, I really found myself waking up at 4 a.m, worrying about our democracy, worrying in particular that so many of the factors that had led to the insurrection were still with us and in many instances getting stronger. So the authoritarianism, the disinformation, the anti-Semitism and white supremacy that had fueled a lot of the hate and violence that day were all very much still with us. And this was, almost 3 years ago.
It seems like a much easier time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's almost quaint, right?
Yeah.
And so, I've spent most of my life as an advocate, but I'm a law professor now. And so, I thought I could write a law review article and it would be read by tens of people in dark rooms and libraries, or I could try to find a way to ring the alarm bells that would reach a broader range of folks and also, preach beyond the choir, right? People who maybe haven't had the opportunity to read the 820-page House Select Committee report on the insurrection, weren't glued to cable television, love our democracy, but maybe are even skeptical about, what happened and whether our democracy is still at risk. And I do believe that it is. And so, as I said, I'm a comic book head from way back, and there's a proud tradition of comic books being, written and used in support of democracy and to challenge bigotry. And so I thought maybe this would be a way to reach a broader audience. And the idea of speculative fiction, the what if, right? In this instance, what if the insurrection had been successful? I thought was important to actually, let's play this out. And, as we see now, there are already attempts by Trump and his allies to tell lies, to reinvent what happened, to minimize an attack on our democracy and the first real challenge to the peaceful transfer of power. And so I wanted to tell a story that was in part about that what if. So I reached out to my now co-writer, Gan Golan, who is himself a very successful graphic novelist. And I pitched the idea to him, and he said, I'm super busy. I'm working on climate justice and the border wall, opposing the border wall, but, I'm in. And so we started work on this, and but he said he didn't have time to do the art himself. He's himself a talented illustrator. So we hired several top-notch, veteran Marvel and DC illustrators, artists. Our lead artists are Will Rosado and Carl Moline, but there are many others. And we were off. And once we started working on it, the facts continued to pour in. The commission report, the January 6th House Committee report, the indictments, the statements that continue to be made by some of the people who were involved in all of this. And so we were, and continued to be running to try to incorporate as much new information as we could while still making it a compelling, character-driven story. And I hope we've accomplished that.
Well, that was one of the things I was wondering while reading it. There's always the people always talk about, oh, we were writing this thing and it became too real. We had to go back and change it because the news caught up with what we were doing. Did you have any of that? And please say no.
There's a bit of it. I mean, part of what's happened is that a number of the things that, just to back up for a second, issue 1, as you know, is set about 9 months after a successful insurrection. And so we're, our readers are thrust into the kind of dystopian near present. And issue number 2 jumps back and really looks at the road, including many of the real events that led us to the insurrection. And so as we were writing that, for example, a lot of Trump's cronies started pleading guilty to felonies involving election interference, particularly in the Georgia case, Sidney Powell and others. And so some of what we had uncovered, we had identified them as bad actors, as insurrectionists, and then a lot of that was reaffirmed by the fact that they admitted to liability, criminal liability, in that way. I would say the thing that maybe was most we predicted in a dark way was former President Trump now saying, yeah, he'd be a dictator on day one. That's a big part of the premise of this comic book, is at least in the scenario we've looked at, which is what if the insurrection had been successful? So it's not about a typical election. It's about a successful insurrection, that we would be living in an autocratic society. And events have only reaffirmed that since then.
What's the sort of feedback you've gotten? Because I feel like we always joke, I think we're joking on the show, that we're not a political show, but when you show up with torches and a noose, we can kind of infer a few things. But there is always the issue, especially now with the way media and belief systems amongst people is so divided and so segregated, and that you can just stay in your own little bubble and only listen to people who agree with you, if this is your how you wish to handle yourself. Have you heard or seen any example of the comic book in your instance? Obviously, there's the history of Captain America fighting Hitler and such, but for you guys, have you seen like this getting through and someone going, wow, this was some really bad stuff that went down?
We have, and I'll tell you a great story. It's actually my favorite story coming out of the comic book journey, if you will. So I've been to 4 Comic-Cons in the last 6 months. And so people who know me know that I don't need an excuse to go to a Comic-Con, but this many is a record for me. And so I was at Baltimore Comic-Con, and this gentleman came up to me looked to be in his 40s, maybe. He was with his son. He had a Yoda backpack, a baby Yoda backpack on, and his son was dressed as Darth Vader because it's, you know, it's Comic-Con.
Perfect.
And he picked up the book. He said, "I love this. I love that you did it. You know, how did you come up with this idea? Were you there?" And I said, "No, you know, but we interviewed a lot of people who were there." And he said, "Oh, I was there." And I said, "Really? What were you doing there?" And he said, "Well, President Trump told us to go." And so I went. And he told me that he went to the Ellipse and he heard Trump speak, and then Trump told him and the crowd to march on the Capitol, and he did that. And he took out his phone and he started showing me photographs of himself, selfies of himself at the Capitol on January 6th with mayhem behind him.
Mhm.
And he kept saying, "You know, I usually don't tell people this." And I'm thinking, "Well, you know, we just met,
Right.
but you're telling me." And he, you know, a couple other things about the encounter, and then I'll tell you why, you know, I think it matters. So he said that he was outside the Capitol, and people started breaking in, and he was getting ready to break in himself. And a woman who had come down on the bus with him, another MAGA supporter, said, "You know what? You've got a kid at home. I've got kids at home. I don't think we should go in there. I think we're going to get in trouble if we do." And he said, you know, kind of the fever broke in terms of rioting, and he didn't go in. And he said, you know, a number of people he was with got prosecuted subsequently. He said he was looking over his shoulder for, you know, a year, expecting the FBI to break down his door. And, you know, and at no point did he say, "And I now realize it was all a big mistake."
Right.
Right. What I think, you know, more modestly, I think he was struggling with the facts. Was, you know, what was true and what was not? Was I sold a lie? Or, you know, is it the mainstream media that's lying? And so we talked for about 20 minutes. And then he bought a book, he bought a copy of issue
There we
one.
go. That's the important thing.
And yes, there you go. And then he left. And I thought, okay, I hope he doesn't read this thing, you know, before I get out of here, because I don't know what he thinks is in it. And about 10 minutes later, he came back, and I thought, you know, rut-row, what's going to happen? And he said, "Could you sign this for me?" And I signed it, and he was off. And so the point here, Luke, is, you know, only you know, based on our shared love of popular culture and comic books, could an insurrectionist and I have had a 20-minute conversation
Right.
that was civilized, that was polite, in which we exchanged ideas, we saw each other's humanity. And, you know, did I convince him? I don't know. I hope so. I hope I, you know, edged him a little. He, you know, our encounter certainly required me to have more, instilled in me more empathy for some of the people who were there. There were some bad actors there, but there were also some people who were duped. And, you know, that's why we chose a comic book, you know, pop culture generally, and a comic book specifically. Not, you know, not necessarily to reach insurrectionists, that was a surprise, but to reach people who are struggling, who aren't quite sure what to make of this moment, and who can be reached in a different way. You know, if I had, you know, tried to preach at this guy, if I had handed him some manifesto, would have fallen flat. But we were able to connect over what I hope is a compelling story. So, you know, I have a lot more less dramatic stories than that, but that one's my favorite.
Oh yeah, I think that's an amazing story. I think that's a
Yeah.
really important story too, because I think those are the people we all kind of, I don't want to say forget about, but we almost forget exist. I think we don't know that those people are there. I think we think the people that were there were like, they're over here. They're either over here or they're over here. And those people that were sort of on the steps, but maybe kind of went, wait a minute, this maybe isn't quite such a good idea after all. Those people are out there, and that's an amazing story.
Yeah, I love the encounter, and it's really true. You know, there were a lot of people, both people who, you know, went to the Capitol and people who stayed home, but you know, shared that emotion of alarm. Is, you know, should I believe the president? And if I believe him, you know, if I believed that an election was being stolen, I wouldn't resort to violence, but I certainly would, you know, try to get out and get active.
Of
And
course.
so, yeah, we have to, empathize with those folks. They, they have to be held accountable, right? The people who engaged in violence or tried to prevent the execution of a fair election of Joe Biden need to be held accountable. But that doesn't mean that they're evil. It means that we need to, our justice system needs to impose some accountability for that wrong act.
And it's interesting because it is such a, there's that line, the idea that you should be allowed to freely gather and express your dissent or opinion that you are against something is, I think, clearly very, very inherent in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But then also dropping a deuce on the Speaker of the House's desk, that's not really, founders didn't think of that one. But it's interesting where that line gets drawn, and that this person walked up to it, looked at it, and essentially in many ways, doesn't that sort of say, like, I believe in the concept of democracy enough that, like, this is the bridge too far. This is the thing that goes against what everyone is seemingly in agreement is what makes this country so great.
Well, I hope that's right. And I think, in his case, based on, the story he told me, I only have his version of it. It was someone he trusted who was there with him, who, spoke reason to him in a way that he could hear. And
Yeah.
I think that's something we all have to understand and, think about. We probably all have, friends or friends of friends or relatives who have really different views than we have, and some that might undermine democracy, right? And I think it says that we all have a responsibility to try to speak the truth, but also a responsibility to use our shared values with those people, to have empathy, to, I tell my students, no one ever persuaded a person for whom they did not have some empathy and understanding. If I don't understand where you're coming from, I have zero chance of persuading you to my point of view. And I'm also probably shutting myself off from learning anything from you. So, empathy is our superpower. And it's really important. And it's what often gets lost in the heat of politics.
Among other things, but probably the most important thing.
Well, no, go ahead.
No, one of the things too that I found so interesting in reading the second one was reliving those elements sort of in rapid time was crazy. And I remembered all of it, and I remembered all of it crystal clear. But just seeing them on the page like that and in that format, and I love, like, I obviously I love comic books too, and graphic novels, and it feels like any graphic novel. It feels like it should be happening in Gotham. It feels like where was the bat signal when I needed it, right? But I'm like, holy crap, this is crazy. But it also felt like I should have been reading this like 30 years from now, and I should have been like 5 when this happened and have no recollection or memory of it. And this should have been something my parents were telling me about. And it's so bizarre to have this to be in our adult life. And I don't even have a question. It's just a really interesting experience. And I guess maybe I'm curious if like people of our generations are kind of having those sort of, I don't know, that kind of like reaction to it, or if I'm just a baby that's like wanting to curl up in the fetal position.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I think you're a baby compared to me, because I'm I think much older than you are, but I think that yeah, when I was a kid, there was a comic book series called Golden Legacy, and it was about the lives of each issue featured a Black person from history. It was, Harriet Tubman or, Frederick Douglass or what have you. And my dad got me the whole set. I wish I still had them. So you would read through it, and it was the same kind of like rapid fire. Frederick Douglass lived a long time, but this compressed you know, the kind of major events in his life from, you know, born in slavery and then escaping and, you know, knowing, being a counselor to Lincoln and the like. And yeah, it felt, it was, you know, 100 years, over 100 years prior, but it felt quite distant. And it's a very bizarre experience, even for me as one of the writers, much less for readers, to realize, yeah, this was 3 years ago.
Right.
And to actually remember all those things and to relive at some level how just bizarre
Right.
you know
Mhm.
it was when you know the issue 2 begins, or the flashback begins with the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia,
Yes.
in which neo-Nazis and you know, white supremacists are marching in the streets and chanting all kinds of horrific things. And you know, one of them rammed the crowd, and a counter protester was killed. And then President Trump said there were good people on both sides. And you know, it does bring you back. But something important, I guess, to say for your listeners who you know, haven't read the book, there's also a lot of hope and resistance in this book, because I think
True.
if it were just a retelling of the, you know, the terrible events leading up to January 6th, I think it would be maybe interesting, but too depressing to you know, to consume. But it really is juxtaposed with what can we all be doing both today under our real circumstances, and you know, heaven forbid we find ourselves in an autocratic society. What might we be doing? And so we're able to follow our heroes as they struggle with that.
Yeah, there's some feisty characters.
For sure. And
Yeah.
you know, to the empathy point, right, as you saw in reading the book, one of our characters is a MAGA voter.
Yes, which I love.
And you know, he's struggling like the guy I met at Comic-Con. This is, we created this character before I
Mhm.
met my friend at Baltimore Comic-Con, but they share, I think, if I interpret my reader correctly, you know, they share some real angst about, you know, what happened and was it worth it and did I do the right thing? And I think that level of empathy is crucial to bringing in other readers. I think if we, you know, if we had made those folks the villains, there are some villains in the comic book, but if we had made every person who showed up on January 6th an arch, you know, Joker-like villain, I think not only would it be inaccurate, but we would lose a lot of readers who would not be able to see themselves in the story.
We never get anywhere, right? If we don't ever kind of find the middle somewhere or find the common ground somewhere, we just keep doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I know, like right from the first pages of seeing him in his hat, I
Hmm.
was like, oh, okay, all right, that's good. It's gonna be good. So yes, and Luke will be the first to tell you, I was, when we were first going to talk, I was fascinated, but I was like, oh, this is gonna really bum me out. I don't know about this. And then in reading it, everything you said is true. It's great. It's fantastic. So
Well, I'm glad to hear it. You know, my inclination when we started writing was to jump straight into the events of leading up to January 6th. And it was my co-writer, Gan Golan, who said, you know, I think we need to make this overwhelmingly a character-driven story, and we need to start with the adventures of our characters, not with the real events. And he won me over. He was definitely right. And you know, that is a reaction that we get from a lot of people is, you know, as you said, Heidi, you know, I thought this was going to be really grim, and actually it's fun and interesting and hopeful, as well as dark, and
right.
in some places, you know, quite dark.
Yeah, balance.
They always say, or I guess it's self-evident, reading a book is one thing, writing a book is another. For you, as someone growing up as a lifelong comic book fan, what was it like to be on the other side of the drawing table, to sort of to have that interaction with these people whose work you know, admire, all of that, to kind of get into that world?
Yeah, the creative process for me was very difficult in ways that I'll describe to you. But also I'm a fanboy, right? So it's, you know, to be able to go to Comic-Con as a creator for the first time. I've been going to Comic-Cons for probably 30 years. New York Comic Con. And this time I got to go as a creator of a comic book. So, that was awesome. And every conversation I have with, longtime comic book creators and artists and the like, I have to kind of suppress my, fanboy instinct. But, the creative process was really difficult. So I've written probably hundreds of nonfiction articles, and, I've edited a nonfiction book, and I've written some screenplays. So I've done both fiction and nonfiction, although primarily nonfiction. But writing, or in my case, co-writing a comic book is different from all of those, because you've got to express an idea in a single image. And so you can't, in a screenplay, you could say, Jim walks into the kitchen and, saves the cat, right? In a comic book, you've got to figure out what are the fewest number of still images that I can use to express this idea. And, and to create characters that are going to be memorable and distinct, and who we can identify with them, not just see them. Little things that were new to me, like if you can't have too much dialogue in a panel, and because it's going to crowd out the image. You've got to have a speech balloon, and it's going to crowd out the images that you're trying to convey. And a couple times the artists who contributed hugely to this, Will and Carl, said, yeah, you can't do, they would read the script and say, yeah, you guys can't do this because there's going to be no room. Or, you're going to have 9 panels on this page and they're all going to be too small to convey the ideas. So there was just a lot of unique comic book stuff that, I had to learn. Gon, my co-writer, because he's done graphic novels and is an illustrator, some of that, a lot of it he already knew, but it was new to me. So, yeah, it's a fascinating journey, to be sure.
And then I'm assuming to see these characters come to life almost before your eyes, where it's sort of like, I pictured this guy like this, but there he is in, some version of flesh and blood.
It's the best. With the characters, we'll give the artist a description, and they'll come back with something, and it's different typically in great ways than what we might have envisioned on the page. Maybe we'll tweak it. Hair should be shorter or what have you, but they add so much to it. And the same is true with everything in the script. We'll say there's one of the indelible images is an Iwo Jima style statue that features the QAnon shaman, right? Who I heard wants to run for Congress. I don't know if that's accurate or
Perfect.
not.
Yeah.
But Will Rosato, our artist, came back with like 4 or 5 different versions of it, and they were all different from what we had been thinking about, and all really interesting in different ways. So yeah, that part has been really gratifying, to work with artists, and then to see, to articulate an idea and 4 or 5 months later see it fulfilled in through somebody else's eyes and pen.
Obviously you've scripted out all 4 books, and this is just in the process of release. Are you working on something else? Are you kind of looking at that date from another angle? Are you working on something about the Third Amendment? What is your do you have a follow-up?
You mean once this series is done?
Once the series is done, yeah. It's the Third Amendment, isn't it?
The Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, is that what you meant?
No, the housing the military.
Yeah. Quartering
yes,
troops.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah. Look, nobody knows the Third Amendment. So, yeah.
I always think of that thing of like, comedians saying, "Oh, I've got a lot of stuff on the Second Amendment. Wake me when you get to the third, and then we can talk about what's the quality material."
Yeah. So yeah, the Third Amendment will be relevant in future issues of this series, 1/6. Yeah, it's a good question. What's next? My day job, my real job is as a law professor. So my next project might be more on the scholarly side. I think I've been thinking, I'll try to give you the brief least geeky brief version of this, which is, in interpreting the Constitution, a lot of courts and scholars and the like tend to look to people who might not have actually had any direct connection to the Constitution. So Alexis de Tocqueville, for example, gets cited a lot in Supreme Court decisions as a kind of a keen observer of the early America. This is a guy from France who showed up years after the Constitution was adopted. Rousseau, Locke, people get philosophers get quoted. And so, I've started to think about, well, who are we missing? Should the poet Phillis Wheatley, who was born in slavery and became what today we would call a public intellectual and an influencer, as well as an artist and a speaker, is that, should we be paying at least as much attention to what Phillis Wheatley had to say about the American condition and our Constitution and our country as we do Alexis de Tocqueville? So I think I want to write something about that. Founding Family is my current working title. And, who knows, there might be a graphic novel version in there somewhere. I mentioned Golden Legacy, those comic books that my dad bought for me. So maybe there'll be a companion graphic novel.
Just to see Phillis Wheatley kicking
Right?
people in the head would be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was actually a Golden Legacy comic book about Phillis Wheatley. That was my
Oh,
first
wow.
introduction
Okay.
to her.
Right.
Yeah, so full circle, yeah.
One-Sixth, the graphic novel by Alan Jenkins and Gan Golan, is available right now on Amazon.com or at 16comicsstore.com. In addition, Alan has started a petition to ban insurrectionists from office under the U.S. Constitution. For more information on that, you can go to moveon.org and search Ban Insurrectionists or Alan's name.
Why the Podcast is produced by the Professional Production Company. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts because we're shallow and need constant validation. For more information, you can check out our website, whythepodcast.com. And like everyone else, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Today's show was recorded and produced by Heidi Hedquist and myself from our world headquarters located on the second floor of the Professional Office Building, centrally located downtown. Our reluctant executive producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This was for Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Flash, we're coming home.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?